The marble floor echoed with Colonel Diane Harris's scraping heels as security officer Mark Reynolds yanked her across the courtroom. Suddenly, the judge's gavel crashed down. "Officer, you just assaulted the newly appointed military advisor to the Department of Justice." Mark's face turned ashen as realization dawned. Charleston Courthouse, 9:15 a.m. Courtroom number 5 buzzed with whispered conversations under slowly spinning ceiling fans. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across worn wooden benches. The air felt heavy, as if the room itself was holding its breath before something momentous. Diane Harris sat perfectly still in the front row. Her posture was military straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. No notebook, no phone, just calm focus as she observed the proceedings. Her cream blouse and tailored black slacks were simple but impeccable. At 58, her close-cropped hair showed dignified streaks of gray, and faint lines around her eyes spoke of years under harsh desert suns and difficult command decisions. Mark Reynolds stood by the entrance, arms crossed over his security uniform. Buttons gleamed under the fluorescent lights as his eyes scanned the room with unearned authority. 20 years as courthouse security had taught him one thing. There were rules about who belonged where, and he enforced those rules. His gaze landed on Harris and narrowed. A black woman sitting front row, no attorney badge, no press credentials, yet sitting with the confidence of someone who belonged. He didn't recognize her, and in his mind, that was problem enough. "Isn't that?" An elderly woman whispered to her companion, but trailed off when Mark glared in her direction. In the row behind Harris, a few people exchanged glances. A young law student leaned toward her classmate. "That looks like the woman from yesterday's news," she whispered, but her friend hushed her with a nervous glance toward Mark. Mark rolled his shoulders and adjusted his belt. Something about Harris's presence disrupted his sense of order. She didn't fidget anxiously like most civilians waiting for court. She didn't check her phone or flip through papers. She just sat, composed and still, as if the space around her naturally belonged to her. He muttered to his younger colleague, "Who led in the front? That's reserved for attorneys and officials." The younger officer shrugged. "Maybe she's with one of the cases?" "Not dressed like that," Mark scoffed. "No credentials, no file. She's out of place." His colleague seemed uncertain. "Should I check with the clerk first?" But Mark was already moving forward, each step thudding against the tile floor, like nails sealing a coffin. Mark approached Harris with deliberate steps that echoed in the increasingly quiet room. His shadow fell across her face, but she didn't look up immediately. "You think this is a circus?" he growled, voice sharp enough to draw attention from nearby seats. "Get up. Out. Now." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A law student snapped her notebook shut. A court reporter paused, fingers hovering over her stenotype. The whispered conversations died instantly. Harris finally looked up, her eyes meeting his without fear or anger, just a calm assessment that somehow made Mark even more furious. She didn't respond verbally, just a slight tilt of her head that felt like a silent challenge. "Do you hear me?" Mark's voice rose. "I am ordering you to leave this courtroom immediately." Harris remained seated, back straight, expression unchanged. Something about her stillness triggered Mark's deepest insecurities. A woman, a black woman, not responding to his authority. "Is there a problem?" Harris finally spoke, her voice low and controlled. Not defiant, not trembling, just measured. The voice of someone used to speaking in situations far more tense than this. "The problem is you're sitting where you don't belong," Mark replied, his hand moving to his belt where his radio hung. "This row is reserved for court officials and representatives." "I understand," Harris nodded slightly. "I'm waiting for the 10 a.m. session." A younger security officer approached cautiously. "Mark, maybe we should check if—" "Stay out of this," Mark snapped, never taking his eyes off Harris. He leaned closer to her. "Last warning. Move to the back rows or I'll escort you out." Harris didn't move. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm supposed to be here." "Show me credentials or move," Mark demanded, voice rising. Several people were now openly watching. A woman in a business suit half rose from her seat, looking concerned. "I don't think you understand," Harris began, still calm. "No, you don't understand." Mark interrupted. In this courtroom, you follow orders. No special treatment because you think you're entitled. The racial undertone wasn't subtle. A few more gasps sounded. The tension in the room became almost unbearable. Harris looked Mark directly in the eyes. I am not seeking special treatment, Officer Reynolds, she said, somehow knowing his name without looking at his badge. I'm simply carrying out my assigned duties. Mark's face flushed. The fact that she knew his name only angered him further. That's it. You're leaving now. The younger officer tried again. Mark, let's just call the clerk and... But Mark had already made his decision. No black woman was going to challenge his authority in his courtroom. Without further warning, Mark grabbed Harris's arm with the practiced force of someone used to removing people from premises. The sudden jerk pulled her forward, her small heels scraping against the floor. A collective gasp rose from the gallery. What the hell are you doing? A woman shot up from her seat, eyes wide with shock. Harris didn't struggle. Her body bent forward momentarily, then steadied itself with remarkable control. What struck everyone watching was a resistance but dignity. She never broke eye contact with Mark, never raised her voice, never showed panic. There was something terrifying in her calm, as if she were watching a machine destroying itself. Mark gripped her wrist tighter and began pulling her toward the exit. In his mind, he was already composing a report. Non-compliant individual, refused lawful orders, removed for courtroom safety. In the back row, a young attorney's hand shook as she recorded the scene on her phone. The security officer who had tried to intervene earlier stood frozen, visibly uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge his superior. Stop this immediately, called a voice from the gallery, but Mark ignored it. Harris still said nothing as Mark dragged her across the floor. With each step, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew denser with disbelief. A few people began reaching for their phones, while others exchanged knowing glances. She looks familiar. Someone whispered loudly. Isn't that Colonel? Another voice began. Mark pulled harder, determined to remove this disruption from his domain. Harris's heel scraped across the marble, creating a sound that seemed to cut through the tension like a knife. A court clerk stood up, phone in hand. Officer Reynolds, I think you should stay out of this. Mark barked. I know how to do my job. Harris's eyes remained fixed on Mark, not with hatred but with a strange sort of pity, as if she were watching someone sign their own dismissal papers without realizing it. Mark had almost reached the side door when he heard a sound that stopped everyone in the room. 3 sharp gavel strikes that cut through the tension like lightning. Enough! Stop immediately. The judge's voice thundered across the chamber. Mark flinched but maintained his grip on Harris's wrist, as if letting go would be admitting wrongdoing. The judge rose, black robes rustling as he leaned forward over the bench. His face showed controlled fury as he spoke with surgical precision. Officer Reynolds, you have just used force against Colonel Diane Harris, the newly appointed military advisor to the Department of Justice and Medal of Honor recipient. The statement needed no amplification. The room went completely still as the words sank in. Mark's face drained of color. She who is, he stammered, unable to form a complete sentence. An older man in the back muttered, My God, it's really her. A law student nodded vigorously, whispering, I saw her in yesterday's department announcement. 30 years of service. Silver Star, commanded special operations in Afghanistan. The doors of the back of courtroom opened, and 3 military officers in dress uniforms entered. The tallest, a general with silver stars glinting on his shoulders, assessed the scene with one sweep of his eyes. Colonel Harris, he said, voice carrying respect that made Mark wince. I see we've arrived at an interesting moment. Mark released Harris's wrist, as if it had burned him. She straightened her blouse sleeve with deliberate movements, every gesture controlled and precise. The judge continued, Allow me to introduce Colonel Diane Harris, decorated veteran of 3 combat tours, former commander of the 5th Special Forces Group, and as of yesterday, special military advisor to our judicial district, officially appointed by the Secretary of Defense. The courtroom exploded in a silent shockwave of realization. Every eye turned to Mark, who stood immobilized by the weight of his mistake. Harris finally spoke, her voice steady and measured. "No harm done, Your Honor. A misunderstanding." Despite her words, her gaze held Mark's for one final moment. Not vengeful, but unforgettable. The general approached, positioning himself between Harris and Mark. "Colonel, are you all right?" "Perfectly fine, General Matheson," she nodded calmly. "Shall we proceed?" The courtroom slowly returned to order, but nothing was the same. Those who had watched in silence now avoided eye contact with each other and with Mark. The same colleagues who had deferred to him minutes ago now kept their distance, as if his disgrace might be contagious. A senior court officer approached Mark. "Report to the chief's office." "Now!" Mark moved woodenly toward the exit. As he pushed through the doors, he heard the judge invite Colonel Harris to approach the bench. Outside in the hallway, courthouse staff had already gathered in small clusters, phones in hand. The video was spreading. Security officer drags decorated black veteran across courtroom floor. Mark knew before anyone told him. His 20-year career had just ended in 40 seconds of blind prejudice. Back inside, Harris stood before the bench, her bearing straight as ever. "Your Honor, before we continue, I'd like to address something. What happened here today isn't just about me. It's about assumptions, about who belongs where, who deserves respect, who gets the benefit of the doubt." The general nodded solemnly. "Colonel Harris has faced worse than this on battlefields from Iraq to Afghanistan. Her resilience isn't what concerns me. It's that she faces disrespect on American soil in a house of justice." In the security office, Mark sat before his supervisor, watching the video of himself dragging Harris across the floor. His personnel file lay open, 20 years without formal complaints, but now his supervisor revealed the truth. "There have been concerns about your selective enforcement. We just never had proof before." The chief security officer entered, face grim. "The video has already reached the Department of Justice. Colonel Harris is a personal appointee of the Secretary. Do you understand the magnitude of what you've done?" Mark couldn't speak. The realization was setting in. He hadn't just manhandled a random black woman. He'd assaulted one of the most decorated officers in recent military history, someone appointed to help reform the very system he thought he was protecting. "I didn't know who she was," he finally muttered. "That's precisely the problem," the chief replied. "You shouldn't need to know someone's rank to treat them with basic dignity." Mark's security badge was placed in an envelope. No dramatic firing, no shouting, just the quiet end of a career built on unquestioned authority and selective enforcement. Outside, reporters had already gathered, and Mark would have to walk past them to reach his car. By afternoon, the video had gone viral. Comments poured in from veterans, legal professionals, and ordinary citizens. "This is how we treat our heroes?" She commanded elite soldiers, and he thought she didn't belong in the front row? Colonel Harris emerged from the courthouse, flanked by the general and court officials. She didn't seek the microphones, but when questions flew, she paused briefly. "I won't be filing charges," she said simply. "But I hope we can use this moment to remember that dignity isn't something you earn through titles. It's inherent. And sometimes the people you're quickest to judge might be the ones who've sacrificed the most for your freedom to make those judgments." The incident triggered something unexpected, a wave of similar stories. A black former judge who had been stopped repeatedly in court buildings. A decorated Asian American veteran questioned about her real citizenship while wearing her service medals. A Latino attorney mistaken for a defendant in his own case. Harris's calm dignity in the face of humiliation had opened a floodgate. What made her story different wasn't just a dramatic reversal when her identity was revealed, but the undeniable evidence that even at the highest levels of achievement, certain Americans were still subject to snap judgments based on appearance. In her temporary apartment that evening, Harris sat alone, staring at the metal case she hadn't unpacked yet. Inside lay the Silver Star, Bronze Stars, and the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration, awarded for her actions saving her unit during an ambush. 30 years of service, culminating in today's humiliation. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages from former soldiers under her command, from military leadership, from civil rights organizations offering support. One message stood out, a younger black female officer who wrote, Colonel, watching you stand your ground today showed me what real strength looks like. Thank you for not letting them make you invisible. Harris touched the screen gently. This was why she had accepted this position instead of a comfortable retirement. This was why, after decades of fighting enemies abroad, she'd taken on a harder battle at home. The fight against assumptions, against the casual dismissal of people who didn't fit expectations. 3 days later, the Department of Justice announced a comprehensive review of courthouse security protocols nationwide, with a focus on implicit bias training. Mark Reynolds had resigned, but the system that had enabled him was finally under examination. What began as one security officer's prejudice had exposed something much larger, a culture where authority figures could selectively enforce respect based on appearance, and where questioning such behavior was seen as more disruptive than the behavior itself. Harris's military career had never been easy. As one of the first black women to command a Special Forces operational unit, she'd faced discrimination in forms both subtle and overt, from being mistaken for administrative staff to having her tactical decisions questioned more rigorously than those of her white male counterparts. She had navigated a minefield of bias throughout her career, yet she had persevered, earning respect through competence, courage, and an unshakable commitment to the mission. In Afghanistan, when her unit was ambushed and she ran through open ground under heavy fire to drag 3 wounded soldiers to safety, no one questioned her leadership again, at least not in the military. But civilian life had proven to be a different battlefield altogether. Despite her rank, her medals, her decades of service, she still encountered people who saw her skin color and gender first, and everything else second or not at all. The courthouse incident was merely the most public manifestation of what she had experienced countless times before, being asked to justify her presence in spaces where others were automatically accepted. In the days following the incident, Harris received a handwritten letter from an 83-year-old black veteran of the Korean War. "I watched that video with tears in my eyes," he wrote. "In my day, I couldn't even sit in the front of a bus in uniform. Today, you're making sure we all have a seat at the table. The fight continues, but it's people like you who move us forward." Harris placed a letter on her desk beside her medals. The juxtaposition wasn't lost on her, how far they'd come, and yet how far they still had to go. She thought about Mark Reynolds. He wasn't merely one bad actor. He was a symptom of systems that still allowed certain people to be the unquestioned arbiters of who belonged and who didn't. Today, that system had been exposed, and exposure was a first step toward change. 1 week after the incident, Colonel Harris addressed a graduating class of law enforcement officers. She didn't mention the courthouse by name, but her message was clear. The uniform you wear, the badge you carry, the authority you're granted, these are tools of service, not dominance. True respect comes not from intimidating others, but from recognizing the dignity inherent in every person you encounter, regardless of their appearance or station. She concluded with words that would be quoted for years to come. Justice isn't just about what happens in courtrooms. It's about how we see each other in every room we enter. Have you witnessed someone being misjudged? Share your thoughts in the comments about how we can build a more respectful society. Your voice matters in this conversation.